All right, welcome back everyone for another deep dive. Today we're going to be jumping into the world of DMT.
Ooh, yeah.
Yeah, we got our hands on this, it's like a handbook, I guess you could call it,
Okay.
that lays out a way to actually extract and consume DMT.
Yeah.
And
Interesting.
yeah, and it's got some pretty wild pictures in it too, I got to say. Like going from just plant bark to these dazzling crystals is pretty remarkable.
Well, almost.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, how do you even get from point A to point B?
Right.
But, the handbook lays it all out. But just to be clear, before we even start getting into this, we are not telling you to go and do any of this stuff. We're just breaking down the science and the steps involved according to this handbook.
Yeah, exploring the how-to, not necessarily the should-you.
Exactly.
Right.
And that's why we've got you here to kind of guide us through this whole, world of complex chemistry and altered states.
Well, I'll do my best. It's going to be quite a journey.
I think so. So to start off, the handbook focuses on a specific type of DMT, the kind you could extract from plants.
Okay, so like naturally occurring DMT, not synthetically produced.
Right, exactly. And it's all about separating that DMT from everything else in the plant, right? And to do that, you have to it's like flipping a switch almost.
Okay.
You shift the DMT between its two forms. You got one form that's more likes to hang out in water, and the other form prefers oil.
Interesting.
Yeah, then they use acids and bases to make it switch back and forth.
So by manipulating the pH, you can sort of guide it, pull it from one solution to another.
Exactly. So like the handbook has this 4-step process that it lays out. Step 1 is all about preparing the bark and just grinding it down as fine as possible.
Oh, so like maximizing surface area.
Exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The author even recommends using like an electric motor for this.
Wow, going all out. I can see why you need good visuals for this.
Yeah, for real. And then step 2 gets a little bit more intense. It's called the acid cook. And they really stress safety here, like big time.
Yeah, acids can be dangerous.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you're essentially like simmering this bark in acidic water, like, I'm thinking vinegar, but like way stronger.
Right, industrial strength.
Yeah. And that helps pull the DMT out from the plant material.
So the acid breaks down the plant matter and allows the DMT to dissolve into the water.
Yep, precisely.
Okay, interesting. So now we've got this like DMT-infused water.
Right.
What happens next?
So that brings us to step 3, which is all about shifting that DMT from the water into something called a nonpolar solvent.
Okay, now you're losing me a bit with the chemistry jargon.
Yeah, no, it gets a little technical.
No worries, just try to break it down for us simple folk.
Sure. Think of it like transferring the DMT from one container to another.
Okay, that helps.
So to do this, they add lye, which is another chemical that you got to be super careful with.
Oh yeah, lye. My grandmother used to make soap with that stuff. Powerful stuff.
For real. But basically, the lye reacts with the acid and forces the DMT to move out of the water and into that nonpolar solvent. It's like coaxing it to switch dance partners.
I like that analogy. Makes it easier to visualize.
Good. So now the DMT's happily dancing with its new solvent partner. Final step, you ready for this?
Hit me with it.
They freeze everything.
Wait, seriously, they just stick it all in the freezer.
Yep, that's called freeze precipitation.
That's a mouthful.
I know, right? But basically, DMT doesn't like to stay dissolved when things get too cold.
So it's like when you forget a soda in the freezer and it explodes.
Kind of, yeah. But instead of an explosion, we get beautiful crystals.
Wow, that's amazing. So the DMT separates out as the temperature drops.
Exactly. And the handbook even has this picture of these crystals. They're just stunning.
I bet. It's like witnessing a transformation from raw plant matter to these delicate structures.
Yeah, for real. The author says they got a yield of 0.67% DMT from the starting plant material.
That doesn't sound like much.
It's actually considered pretty high, especially given how little DMT is actually in those plants.
Oh, I see. It's like finding a needle in a haystack, but instead of a needle, it's a tiny bit of DMT.
Exactly.
You're basically extracting a treasure from a mountain of raw material. Impressive.
It is pretty remarkable when you think about it.
It's like panning for gold, It takes effort, but the reward is worth it.
Yeah, I guess it's a good analogy for it.
So what happens to that 0.67% DMT? What's next in this process?
Well, that's where things get even more interesting, but we'll have to save that for the next part of our deep dive.
Oh, you're going to leave us hanging like that?
Got to keep you coming back for more.
All right, fine. But I'm definitely tuning in next time to hear what happens next.
You got it. We'll be back with more on the fascinating world of DMT and the secrets this handbook reveals.
So we've got this tiny percentage of DMT, this treasure that we've managed to extract. What happens next? What do they do with it?
Well, the handbook says even after all that work, there's still more to be done if you want to get it really, really pure.
Ah, so it's like finding a diamond in the rough.
Exactly.
You still got to polish it up.
Right. And they call this process like purification. And they actually have a couple different ways to do it.
Oh, wow. So there are options.
Yeah. One method is called recrystallization. And it's pretty simple, actually.
Okay.
You basically just dissolve those DMT crystals in a little bit more of that same solvent, the nonpolar one, and then you just cool it down again.
Ah, so you're kind of repeating the freezing step, but this time it's to leave behind any leftover impurities?
Yeah, exactly. It's like filtering out all the gunk.
Makes sense. So you get even purer crystals after that.
Right. And get this. The stuff you filter out, the oily byproduct, it's not just waste. It's actually another form of DMT called DMT N-oxide.
Oh, wow. So you get like a bonus product.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting. And is that stuff psychoactive too?
Yeah, it's not as potent as the crystallized DMT, but it can still contribute to the experience.
Huh. That's cool. So you're telling me there's a second purification method too?
Yep, they call it crystal growing. And it's almost like, I don't know, it sounds kind of magical.
Crystal growing. I like the sound of that.
Right. This time, instead of freezing everything quickly, you slowly evaporate the solvent.
Oh, I see. So the crystals have more time to form and grow bigger.
Yeah. And they say it makes them even purer, too.
Fascinating. They really thought of everything, huh?
They did. They even specify you got to use a smooth glass container for this, like no plastic.
Interesting. Why is that?
It's like when you grow rock candy. You know how the sugar crystals need a smooth surface to attach to?
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Same idea here.
So is it like you're choosing between a bunch of small diamonds or one big perfect diamond?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It depends what you're going for, you know? Quick purification or those beautiful showcase crystals.
Yeah, I can see how people would be into both.
Right. But now the handbook takes a turn and starts talking about how to actually prepare the DMT for consumption.
Oh, okay. Getting to the practical stuff.
Yeah. And they start off by describing how to make something called DMT fumarate.
DMT fumarate?
No, it's a salt form of DMT. So the DMT we've been talking about, the one that crystallizes, that's called free-base DMT.
Okay.
And it's great for smoking, but it doesn't last very long and it's hard to store.
Ah, so the salt form is more stable.
Exactly.
That makes sense. But why make a salt if you're just going to smoke the freebase? What's the point of this fumarate stuff?
Well, the salt form actually lets you consume it in other ways, like snorting or even injecting. But we got to be really clear here. Injection is super risky.
Oh, yeah. Definitely not recommending that.
Not at all. But that's what the handbook says, so we're just putting the information out there.
Right.
Do your research, be safe, all that good stuff.
Absolutely. So, back to DMT fumarate. How do you even make a salt out of DMT? Sounds complicated.
You'd think so, right? But it's actually pretty straightforward. You mix free-base DMT with fumaric acid in a specific ratio, and bam, crystals appear.
Wow, just like that.
Yeah, it's kind of like a magic trick, but it's all chemistry, of course.
Science is pretty magical when you think about it.
I know, right? But the handbook... No, you got to be precise to make sure you're making something that's both safe and effective.
Right, I can see that.
Yeah.
So after all this talk about extraction and purification and salts, what else does the handbook cover?
Well, it gets into some interesting stuff about sharing the DMT experience. They talk about something called enhanced leaf.
Enhanced leaf? What's that?
Basically, it's about infusing smokable herbs with DMT.
Oh, interesting. So you're not just smoking pure DMT, you're mixing it with other herbs.
Exactly. They suggest using herbs that can, complement the DMT experience.
Like what kind of herbs?
Well, they mentioned Calea zacatici, which is supposed to promote vivid dreams.
Oh, wow. That sounds intense.
Yeah, and Damiana, which has a unique aroma.
I've heard of Damiana, so it's like you can customize the experience with different herbs.
Exactly. And the handbook even has a formula for calculating how much DMT to add to the herbs depending on the potency you're going for.
That's pretty cool. So they're giving you all the tools you need to create your own blend.
Yeah, they really did think of everything.
It's impressive the level of detail they go into. You can tell they're passionate about this stuff.
For sure. But, before we get into the actual ways to consume DMT, which we'll talk about in the next part,
okay,
I think it's important to remember that this is powerful stuff we're talking about, and it can have some really intense effects.
Absolutely. It's not something to take lightly.
Right. We've been talking about the science and the steps involved, but we got to be responsible too.
For sure. Knowledge is power, but it's how you use that knowledge that matters.
Exactly. So Anyone out there considering experimenting with DMT, please do your research. Be safe.
Yeah, and be respectful of the power of these substances.
Yeah, couldn't have said it better myself. All right, we'll be back with more on DMT and all its fascinating facets in the next part. Okay, so we've talked about how to get DMT, how to make it super pure, even how to turn it into a salt.
Right, we've covered a lot of ground.
We have. But now the big question is, how do people actually consume this stuff?
That's where the handbook gets really interesting. It lays out all these different options, like a menu.
A menu for the adventurous psychonaut, you could say.
I like that. But of course, we're just exploring the information here.
Right, not endorsing any of this.
Safety first, always.
Absolutely. So let's dive in. The most common method the handbook talks about is smoking enhanced leaf.
Right, we touched on that earlier.
Yeah, infusing herbs with DMT.
And they recommend specific herbs that can, shape the experience.
Yeah, exactly. They talk about Kalea Zakatachichi for dreamlike effects.
Oh, yeah, I remember reading about that one.
And Damiana for the aroma.
Interesting. So it's about creating a blend that enhances the whole trip.
Yeah, that's the idea. And they have specific instructions on how to smoke it, too, like holding in the smoke for as long as you can.
Makes sense. And starting slow, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. You don't want to overdo it, especially your first time.
For sure. The handbook even mentions that coughing during the trip can be really jarring.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, something to keep in mind.
Okay, so next up is smoking DMT crystal directly. And this is where they introduce the machine.
The machine. Sounds intriguing.
Right. It's basically like a homemade device, this modified glass bottle with steel wool inside.
Steel wool, like the stuff you use for cleaning.
Yeah, exactly. Apparently it's good for vaporizing DMT.
Huh. Who knew?
I know, right? It's all about innovation, I guess.
So you put the crystals on the steel wool, heat it up, and inhale.
That's the gist of it. They claim it produces smoother smoke than a regular pipe.
Interesting. But I gotta say, I'm a bit hesitant about homemade smoking devices.
Yeah, I get that. Safety first, always.
Maybe a professionally made vaporizer would be a safer bet.
Probably. It's good to remember that this handbook is just one person's perspective, and it's always smart to do your own research.
Definitely. So what about other ways to consume DMT besides smoking?
Well, the handbook talks about snorting DMT fumarate.
The salt form.
Yep, that's the one. It's water-soluble, remember?
Right.
So it absorbs better through your mucous membranes.
Ah, that makes sense. And what's the experience like?
They compare it to a shorter, less intense ayahuasca trip.
Huh. So you can get some of the effects of ayahuasca without the whole ceremony and the brew.
Kinda, yeah. But, everyone's experience is different.
Of course. And the last method they mention?
Pharmawaska.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that one. That's the one where you take DMT orally, right?
Right, but you have to take it with MAOIs, which are these compounds that stop your body from breaking down the DMT.
So it allows the DMT to actually reach your brain and have an effect.
Exactly. But MAOIs can be really dangerous.
Yeah, I've heard about that. They can interact with all sorts of things like medications and food.
Right. And it can lead to some serious health problems.
Yeah.
The handbook is really clear about the risks.
Good. They should be. Pharmawaska is definitely not something to mess around with.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
Got to be incredibly careful with that one. So, yeah, we've covered a lot today, from extracting DMT to all these different ways to consume it.
It's been a wild ride through the world of DMT.
It has. But, after all this, I'm still left wondering, why are people so drawn to this stuff? What are they searching for?
That's the real mystery, isn't it? The handbook gives us the how-to, but the why is much deeper, more personal.
And maybe that's a question each person has to answer for themselves.
Exactly. It's about personal exploration and discovery.
Well, on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive into the world of DMT.
Thanks for taking us on this journey. It's been fascinating. It's a little mind-bending.
Yeah, for sure. And everyone listening, thanks for joining us. Keep those minds open, explore responsibly, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.